There's a strange feeling that comes after you've pushed through something difficult, and suddenly, there's nothing left to fight. No alarms going off in your head. No urgency pulling you in 10 different directions. No constant pressure to prove, fix, or chase something. At first, it doesn't even feel like peace. It feels unfamiliar, almost like something is missing. Because for a long time, your life may have been defined by movement, by effort, by trying to hold things together or make sense of situations that never fully gave you clarity. And now things are quieter. Not perfect, not magically solved, but quieter in a way that makes you stop and ask, why does this feel so different? There's a phase people don't talk about enough. It's not the struggle. It's not the breakthrough. It's what comes after. That space where you're no longer who you used to be, but you're still adjusting to who you've become. And in that space, rest doesn't feel natural right away. Because your system is still used to surviving. You might notice it in small ways. You sit down to relax, but your mind keeps scanning for problems. You finally have time, but you don't know what to do with it. You feel calmer, but part of you is waiting for something to go wrong. That's not weakness. That's what happens when you've been in a prolonged state of pressure, growth, or emotional intensity. Your mind doesn't instantly switch modes just because your circumstances changed. It needs time to recalibrate. When the fight becomes your identity, there was a version of you that had to stay alert. Not because you wanted to, but because life required it. You had to think ahead. You had to read between the lines. You had to figure things out without always having clear guidance. And over time, that way of living didn't just stay external. It became internal. You didn't just handle challenges, you became someone who expected them. Even in calm moments, part of you stayed prepared. Because when you've been through enough uncertainty, your brain learns to associate stillness with vulnerability. So when things finally slow down, it doesn't immediately feel safe. It feels unfamiliar. There's a quiet truth here that most people miss. You can win the battle and still carry the mindset of someone who's in the middle of it. That's why rest can feel uncomfortable. Not because you don't deserve it, but because your identity hasn't fully caught up to your new reality yet. Section 2. The adjustment phase nobody prepares you for. Growth is often described as this powerful, life-changing moment. And sometimes it is. But more often it's subtle. It's the slow realization that your reactions are changing. That things that used to trigger you don't hit the same way anymore. That your priorities are shifting, even if your environment hasn't fully changed yet. And then comes the adjustment phase. This is where things can feel confusing. Because you're no longer operating from the same patterns, but you haven't fully built new ones yet. You might feel less reactive, but also less certain. More peaceful, but also slightly disconnected. More aware, but also more selective with your energy. It's not a setback. It's a transition. Think of it like this. If you've been running for a long time and suddenly stop, your body doesn't instantly relax. Your heart rate stays elevated. Your breathing takes time to slow down. Your muscles are still engaged. That's exactly what's happening mentally and emotionally. You're not broken. You're coming down from a state that required constant output. Why rest feels unproductive but isn't. One of the biggest challenges in this phase is the way rest is misunderstood, especially if you're used to measuring your value through effort. If you've spent years being productive, solving problems, pushing forward, then doing nothing can feel like falling behind, even when it's exactly what you need. You might catch yourself thinking, I should be doing more. I'm wasting time. I need to figure out the next step. But what if this moment isn't about the next step? What if it's about integration? Because growth isn't just about what you go through. It's about what you absorb from it. And that only happens when you give yourself space to process. Rest is where your mind organizes everything you've experienced. It's where your nervous system resets. It's where clarity begins to form without forcing it. But if you skip that phase, you carry unfinished tension into your next chapter. So this period of stillness, it's not empty. It's active in a different way, letting go of the need to stay in control. When you've been in situations where things felt uncertain or unpredictable, control can become a form of comfort. Planning ahead, thinking through every possibility, trying to stay one step ahead of everything. It makes sense. It helped you navigate moments where you didn't have many options. But here's the shift. What protected you in one phase can exhaust you in another. If things are no longer as chaotic, if you're no longer in the same kind of pressure, then holding on to that level of control becomes unnecessary weight. And letting go of it doesn't mean becoming careless. It means recognizing that you don't have to carry the same intensity anymore. That's not easy, because your mind is used to equating control with safety. So when you loosen your grip, it can feel like you're risking something, even when you're not. This is where trust starts to replace tension. Not blind trust, not passive thinking, but a grounded understanding that you don't have to force everything to be okay. The quiet rebuilding of self. Something else happens in this phase that's easy to overlook. You start rebuilding your identity, but this time without pressure. Before, your identity may have been shaped by circumstances. What you had to deal with, what you had to overcome, what you had to figure out. But now, there's space to ask a different question. Who am I when I'm not in survival mode? That question can feel surprisingly difficult. Because for a long time, your focus wasn't on exploration. It was on endurance. So now things shift. You start noticing what actually feels right to you, not just what's necessary. You begin to reconnect with parts of yourself that didn't have room before. Your preferences become clearer. Your boundaries become more natural. Your energy becomes more intentional. This isn't a dramatic transformation. It's quiet, but it's real. And it's one of the most important parts of growth. Because it's not about becoming someone new. It's about becoming more aligned with who you already are without the noise. When distance starts to feel natural. There's a point in your growth where distance stops feeling like loss and starts feeling like clarity. Not because you've become cold, not because you've stopped caring, but because you've started understanding what actually deserves your energy. You might notice that certain conversations don't pull you in the same way anymore. Things that once felt urgent now feel unnecessary. Situations that once drained you now feel easy to step away from. And it's not forced. That's the key difference. Before, creating distance might have required effort. You had to convince yourself. You had to justify it. You had to push through guilt or second guessing. But now it feels quieter, more natural, almost like your mind and body are finally in agreement. This isn't disconnection. It's alignment. When you grow, your internal standards shift. Not in a way that makes you better than anyone, but in a way that makes you more aware of what fits and what doesn't. And once you see that clearly, it becomes difficult to ignore. You don't need to argue your way out of situations anymore. You simply don't step into them. Why your circle may feel different now. One of the more subtle changes during this phase is how your relationships begin to feel. Not necessarily worse, just different. You might still care about the same people, but the way you connect starts to shift. Some conversations feel surface level. Some dynamics feel outdated. Some expectations no longer make sense to you. And that can create an internal conflict. Because part of you remembers how things used to be. But another part of you recognizes that you've changed. This is where many people feel stuck. Not because they don't know what's happening, but because they don't know how to navigate it without causing disruption. So they stay in between. Not fully engaged, but not fully detached either. But here's the reality. Growth doesn't always remove people from your life. Sometimes it just changes the role they play in it. And that's okay. Not every connection is meant to stay the same forever. Some are tied to specific phases of who you were, not who you're becoming. Letting that shift happen naturally, without forcing closeness or distance, is part of emotional maturity. The psychology of outgrowing environments. It's not just people. Sometimes it's entire environments that start to feel different. Places you used to feel comfortable in now feel limiting. Routines that once made sense now feel repetitive. Even goals you once chased don't hold the same weight anymore. That can feel unsettling at first, because familiarity creates a sense of stability, even when it's no longer aligned. So when you start outgrowing environments, your mind may try to pull you back. Not because it's right, but because it's known. But growth changes your perspective. You start seeing things you didn't notice before. Patterns, energy, limitations. And once that awareness is there, it's hard to go back to seeing things the old way. This doesn't mean you need to make sudden changes. It doesn't mean everything has to shift overnight. But it does mean you're becoming more conscious of where you place yourself. And that awareness naturally leads to better decisions over time. You don't force your way out. You gradually move toward what feels more aligned. Learning to sit in stillness without escaping it. One of the most challenging parts of this phase is learning how to be still without trying to escape it. Because stillness can feel unfamiliar. And when something feels unfamiliar, the natural reaction is to fill it. With noise, with distractions, with constant activity. You might reach for your phone without thinking. Start planning something just to feel productive. Look for something to fix, even when nothing is wrong. Not because you need to, but because your mind is used to movement. Stillness asks something different from you. It asks you to observe instead of react, to feel instead of avoid, to exist without constantly doing. And that can feel uncomfortable at first. But this is where a deeper level of clarity begins to form. Because when you're not constantly reacting, you start noticing more. Your thoughts become clearer. Your emotions become easier to understand. Your decisions become less rushed. Stillness isn't emptiness. It's space. And in that space, you start hearing yourself more clearly. Redefining what progress actually means. There's a quiet shift that happens when you move out of survival mode. Your definition of progress starts to change. Before, progress might have looked like constant movement. Doing more, achieving more, fixing more. But now it looks different. It might look like saying no without. It might look like choosing peace over proving a point. It might look like walking away from something that doesn't feel right, even if it once did. These aren't loud wins. They don't always get recognized. But they're real. Because progress isn't just external. It's internal. It's the way you respond instead of react. The way you choose instead of drift. The way you understand instead of assume. And most importantly, it's the way you stop abandoning yourself just to maintain comfort. That's a different level of growth, the stabilization phase of identity. At some point, things begin to settle. Not perfectly, but steadily. You're no longer questioning every decision. You're no longer second-guessing every feeling. You're no longer trying to prove your growth to yourself or anyone else. You just move differently. This is the stabilization phase, where your new mindset stops feeling like something you're practicing and starts feeling like something you are. Your boundaries become automatic. Your awareness becomes consistent. Your reactions become more measured. And there's less internal noise. Not because life is silent, but because you're no longer amplifying everything. You've learned what matters, and more importantly, what doesn't. That clarity creates a kind of calm that isn't dependent on circumstances. It's internal. And once you reach that point, something interesting happens. You stop looking for constant change, because you're no longer trying to escape where you are. You're finally okay being there. If any part of this felt familiar, take a moment and actually sit with that. Not to analyze it, not to turn it into another task, just to recognize how far you've come, even if you don't usually give yourself credit for it. Growth like this doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it looks like quiet decisions, like choosing peace in moments where you used to choose pressure, like finally allowing yourself to slow down without feeling guilty about it. If you're in that space right now, I'd be interested to hear what this phase has felt like for you. Not a perfect explanation, just something real. And if this kind of perspective is something you want more of, you can stick around and be part of the conversation here. No pressure, just something to come back to when you need it. Take your time with where you are. You don't have to rush what's finally starting to settle.